Does the election in the 23rd Congressional District of New York State prove the fallacy of the Republican strategy, emulating Reagan and Bush, of saying one thing and doing another, campaigning by slogan but governing by delegation to criminals and incompetents? It seems that Americans are finally figuring out that the Republicans have nothing to offer, that smaller government and lower taxes, their favorite phrase, leads to collapsing levees, disintegrating schools, and infrastructure privatized to Spanish and Australian profiteers, while free trade means America's biggest corporations get to inflate their profits and CEO salaries by throwing Americans out of work and building things in cheap labor countries. Is that the debate that happened in New York's 23rd? Craig Shirley is here with us. RendezvousWithDestiny.org is the website for his new book. Let me just show the cover of this. Rendezvous with Destiny, Ronald Reagan and the Campaign That Changed America by Craig Shirley. And Craig, I spent well over an hour with your book. I think that if somebody is looking for a pro-Reagan biography of some detail, considerable detail, you've written a brilliant one.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Tom. I'm not sure I would call it pro-Reagan because I try to be a forensic reporter and historian and report the facts. Obviously, the facts favored Reagan because he won. But I tried to show all sides of the candidate, including his temper, which included almost punching out his campaign manager in New Hampshire in 1980. So, yeah. I tried to do my best. And I think, quite frankly, in dealing with both Senator Kennedy and with Jimmy Carter, I was very even-handed. As a matter of fact, I went so far as to hire an old friend of mine, John Persinos, whose politics are liberal. We're very dear friends, very close friends. He's a terrific writer and a terrific editor. And I said, I want you to make sure to drain out any overt bias out of this book, and I think he did a very good job.
Well, that's interesting. My take on it. I'll just say this very quickly because I want to get into the New York 23rd District rather than debate Reagan with you. We've done that before, and we'll do it again. But
right.
Is that I didn't see anything in there about the October surprise. I didn't see anything in there.
Yeah, it's in there. The October surprise is in there, but not the October surprise you're referring to.
No.
It was the other October
what
surprise.
Bill Casey told his lawyer, Milton Gould, that he was going to testify to before Congress the morning that he had his seizure and was taken off and had that part of his brain that controls speech removed. It's what happened.
It was a CIA plot by the CIA.
I don't know. I really don't know. But I think that I would love to have a conversation with you, Craig, after you've read Barbara Honegger's book, October Surprise.
Yeah, I read Barbara Honegger's book, and I read Gary Sick's book, and there's no evidence whatsoever. It's just ridiculous.
Okay.
There's no.
Right.
The allegation is that in the middle of a heated campaign, George Bush, the vice presidential nominee, is able to sneak away from the hundreds of national.
Well, actually,
media.
It wasn't George Bush. It was Bill Casey, the
No. Gary Sick said it was George Bush who went to France to meet with representatives of the Ayatollah Khomeini to keep the hostages there. Actually, if you ask national political reporters like David Broder and others, they will say is that there's far more evidence that Carter played politics with the hostages, not keeping them there, but politics with the hostages.
Craig, let me pause you right there because we're going to run out of time debating what happened 30 some odd years ago.
Well, but it's a worthy debate.
It is, but for some time when we're going to have that debate. Right now, we had an election yesterday, and the Conservative Party candidate, the Republican Party candidate, got bumped out because she was too liberal for the Republicans. The Conservative candidate lost, Doug Hartmann lost to Bill Owens, the Democrat, and he's a Democrat who's actually a Democrat. I mean, he's unlike in Virginia, where you had a Democrat running for governor saying that he was against climate change legislation, he was against the Employee Free Choice Act, he was, he was
against gay marriage, and he was pretty solid on the Second Amendment.
Right.
But at the time that he was nominated, the whole Democratic Party establishment, the Obama administration, all the media establishment said this guy is the perfect choice for Virginia because he can cross over party lines and appeal to culturally conservatives.
But see, that's what I think is a mistake. I mean, in Vermont,
I agree. I don't think candidates should play games.
Exactly. In Vermont, you've got Senator Bernie Sanders. He was a congressman for well over a decade.
Right.
Up in the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont, about a third, the northeast third of the state, which is entirely rural. rural. Bush took it in both elections with over 80%. Bernie gets over 80% of the vote.
Right.
And he calls himself a democratic socialist.
Right. And you know what? You're making the point that conservatives made against Didi Scalzafava and the people who picked her because they were playing political games. They were trying to dress her up as a Republican when, in fact, as you just said, she was liberal.
Yeah, well, or at least on a couple of issues.
Across the board.
On two of the major litmus test issues, though, for Republicans or for conservatives, abortion and what was the other one? There were two issues that blew up in her face. Gay rights. On abortion and gay rights, she was, quote, liberal.
Abortion, I will grant you, is a litmus test, and it's in the platform. There's a lot of debate inside the Republican Party about what the proper position should be on the issue of homosexuality, gay rights. I personally think, and I speak for a lot of Reagan conservatives, a lot of libertarian conservatives, we thought that the constitutional amendment on marriage was ridiculous. It was a joke. It was a pandering. It was the worst form of political cowardice. And I thought it was ridiculous then, and I wrote it at the time, and I think even more so now.
Well, I would say we're talking with Craig Shirley. He's also the president of Shirley and Bannister Public Affairs, a PR firm that books many of our conservative guests, actually, and thank you for it.
Sure.
But also a great spokesperson for the conservative viewpoint in this country, and an accomplished author.
Thank you.
Craig,
likewise. I mean, you had some terrific books.
Thank you, Craig. I'm concerned that your party and mine both have a problem, that both of our parties have been corrupted by corporate power.
Absolutely.
Frankly.
Absolutely.
And that if we don't, and that the New York 23rd is perhaps an example of that, because Doug Hartmann, the Conservative Party candidate, most of his money came from out of state, and most of it came through these right-wing groups that are ostensibly grassroots groups, Dick Armey's groups. Dick Armey was actually standing there with him on the campaign trail,
right,
that are actually just front groups for big money from a few very wealthy families and dirty industries.
No, because it's against the law to do that. It's against the FEC law. As a matter of fact, what Hoffman's candidacy represented, and what you should applaud, was a populist uprising against the corporate interests. And you're seeing that in this. And I agree with you entirely. Is that you have a Republican Party who, over the last 8 years, became big government republicanism and was representing corporate interests, and a Democratic Party which has traditionally represented governmental interests, but now has added corporate interests to its portfolio. So we populists, whether you're a liberal populist or a conservative populist, is that we're left standing on the side of the road. Right. While there's an old saying that when the elephants are fighting, the mice are at risk. But when the elephants are making love, the mice aren't much safer.
There you go. I'd never heard the second half of that.
And the elephants are making love right now.
Yeah, Craig, exactly. The elephants and the donkeys. We have just a minute left. You really touched a button there with the progressive populists and conservative populists. Yesterday on this program, I was suggesting to my listeners and to my progressive colleagues and friends that we should show up at Tea Party events not to trash the teabaggers, and I don't mean that in a derisive term. A lot of them are referring to themselves that way these days.
Right.
But instead to show up with signs and posters that say, get corporate funding out of politics.
Yes.
Break up the big corporations.
Find common ground.
Yeah.
I mean,
there's a Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt was a Republican. There's a Teddy Roosevelt strain that runs through both sides.
Right.
Let's come together, and let's use Dick Armey's money to do it.
I don't know about Dick Armey's money. I don't know about that, but there is an overlap between liberal populism and conservative populism in that they're both opposed to the concentration of power.
Yes, absolutely. And in that regard, I think, frankly, we need to be doing a little more reaching across the aisle on both sides. And glad that you can come on the program and be a part of that, Craig Shirley and Bannister Public Relations, and also the let's see, RendezvousWithDestiny.org, the website for his new book, Rendezvous with Destiny. Thanks, Craig.
Thank you, Tom.
I don't think so. I wanted to share with you a couple of news stories apropos this whole conversation of left-right corporate control. What's driving the Tea Party movement? What's driving the so-called grassroots of the right? And what has happened to the grassroots of the left? See, on the left, we don't have a Dick Armey. We don't have a Koch Industries. We don't have a Scaife Foundation. This, from today's Financial Times, there's a picture here of this giant hot air balloon, the 80-foot tall hot air balloon. The headline, right-wing, the Financial Times, this is a conservative newspaper out of the UK, right? But, by the way, they have larger circulation in the U.S. than in the UK, but it's right-wing activists fly in face of efforts to cut CO2 emissions. And the subhead, Americans for Prosperity, fast becoming a formidable force on the political scene. I got an email this morning from somebody at Koch Industries, K-O-C-H, saying that yesterday I had attributed them to funding for a variety of right-wing sources, and they were not, in fact, funding any of those right-wing sources. And they referenced an article, an apology note in Think Progress that essentially said that. And so apparently that's the case, although there is apparently one that they're still with. This from today's Financial Times. Americans for Progress is partly funded by the Koch Family Foundation, an offshoot of Koch Industries, KOCH, the largest privately owned U.S. energy company, and receives other corporate funding, including from ExxonMobil in the past. Mr. Phillips declined to give details of current funders. But they're describing themselves as, Mr. Phillips says AFP is merely a group of frustrated Americans promoting smaller government. You know, the meme here, and this is this giant hot air balloon. This is Americans for Prosperity. It's across the top. It says, expose the ballooning costs of global warming hysteria. Grassroots events organized by Americans for Prosperity. Okay, so here's the problem. In a world and in a time as hardcore conservative as Craig Shirley will come out and say there is too much power concentrated in corporate hands. In an era and a time when there's that much power, and the only thing that can challenge that power is government. Consider this for a moment. Government brings into being corporations. It authorizes their existence. If you want to incorporate, you have to go to the Secretary of State of your state and file papers to incorporate. And the state has the power to pull that incorporation. But it essentially creates a whole brand new entity out of thin air, a legal abstraction, a corporation. Corporations are creatures of the state. And yet, at the same time, they have now gotten so large and so powerful as a result of a series of Supreme Court decisions over the years. They've gotten so large and so powerful that they're actually able to challenge the state. In an era when corporations are so powerful that they can destroy our lives, that millions of Americans are dying, that probably about 100 people will die during this program from lack of access to health care because they don't have health insurance, and they don't have appropriate health insurance, or they're underinsured. Because we have a for-profit bunch of gangsters, a for-profit cartel that runs the health insurance industry in the United States, that has antitrust monopoly exemptions. That in the midst of that, what do you want to challenge that corporate power? And this is the question I think that we need to start asking these conservatives. It's like they go on TV and they go on the radio and they go to and they do their town halls and they say, we need smaller government. Okay, you get smaller government. Who's going to take on ExxonMobil? Who's going to take on United Healthcare? Who's going to take on Wells Fargo? Who's going to take on AIG? Who's going to stop the abuses? Who's going to take on the credit card companies? Who's going to take on the corporate polluters? Who's going to take on the people who are fouling our food supply with genetically modified organisms? Who's going to take them on? If not government, who? And they have no answer for that. And yet this meme has become so pervasive, this thought virus has become so pervasive in American thought and in the media. I mean, the media embraces this. Even Democrats are embracing this. As I pointed out, this idiot who ran for the governor, the Democrat who ran for the governorship of Virginia Everybody said, oh, he's the perfect guy. He's a conservative Democrat. What? He's a small government Democrat. Well, then he's not looking out for you and me. Because in an era of big corporations, in an era of transnational corporations, in an era where big corporations will play one state off against the other to get more tax breaks so that you and I have to pay more in personal income taxes so that they not only do not have to pay taxes, but they actually get money from our governments to locate factories in those states and things like that. In an era like that, the only thing that we have that stands between us and to paraphrase Grover Cleveland, the only Democrat who was president during the robber baron era in the late 1900s, between us and the iron heel of corporations, the only thing that stands between us and the iron heel of corporations is government. And Franklin Roosevelt pointed that out. Franklin Roosevelt called that out. The American people figured that out, and they said, you know, you're right. And he declared war on those corporate interests, and to a large extent, he won. And we need to do it again. And whenever a conservative says, I'm in favor of small government, you have to say, then you mean you're in favor of large corporations? Because that's the choice. It's just like people say, well, I don't want the government telling me, what doctor I can go. Oh, you'd rather have Stephen Hemsley of United Healthcare makes $700 million for 5 years. You'd rather have him tell you?